I have a very funny quote, which is this is from his notes on the state of Virginia in 1787. He said, "The mobs of great cities add just so much to the support of pure government as sores do to the strength of the human body."
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that kind of sums it up. When was the last time you were asked the name of the state capital and how'd you do? This is the eve of a very special occasion. It's almost the 250th birthday of the United States, this July 4th. And so we wanted to do something to celebrate here on Build Order. So today we're going to talk about where America decided to place power and why. Most of us think about capitals as sleepy government towns. They have marble buildings, they host school trips. Many were purposely placed inland, and they're usually eclipsed by their more interesting coastal cousins. But when you actually look at where state capitals are located, why they were chosen, and how they perform economically, the story gets a lot more interesting. So that's what we're going to explore in this episode. The question of whether state capitals are actually, and secretly, one of America's most profound city building machines. I'm Lauren,
I'm Jen.
and this is Build Order. So Sam Houston, one of Texas's founding fathers, who I'm sure you know well, infamously called Austin the most unfortunate site on earth for a seat of government.
He did not mince words.
He did not mince words.
Yeah.
And so this seems like the perfect place to start because it shows how strange the capital selection process can be anywhere. So Austin was established by the Republic of Texas when it was not part of the US yet in 1839. It was named after Stephen F. Austin, who was he's known as the father of Texas. And before Austin, it was actually called Waterloo. And the state capital moved around pretty frequently. So at one point, it was basically wherever President David Burnett happened to be, which is quite akin to how it was for the United States, where it was wherever George Washington was during the Revolutionary War. And so they chose Austin for a couple reasons. One, it's centrally located in Texas, and it pointed towards Western expansion into the state. It had natural beauty and resources, its rivers, its lakes. It had enough open land to sort of design a capital city from scratch. And Sam Houston's objections were also very fair. So it was remote relative to the other population centers in Texas at the time. It was exposed to Native American and Mexican attack. And it was not the obvious established commercial center in the state at the time, which was Houston. Actually, Austin's early history really shows how fair these objections were and how true they were. So in 1842, Mexican troops captured San Antonio. That was only 3 years after Austin had been founded established as a capital. And so when these Mexican troops captured San Antonio, Sam Houston ordered the archives moved out of Austin for safekeeping. And this leads to literally one of the funniest episodes in Austin's history and probably even Texan history, which is called the Archive War. And so it's New Year's Eve, 1842. Houston sends men to seize the government records from the Capitol in Austin. And as they're loading up the wagons, a woman who's a resident of the city, Angelina Eberly, sees them. And she fires the cannons in the town to wake everyone up and alert the city. And so the local Austin residents, they get up, they get out of bed, they chase down the wagons, they force them to surrender at gunpoint, and then they bring the archives back. And they then celebrate with a New Year's Eve party, which to me is very, very Austin.
It is very Austin. Yeah, it's like, oh, we chased everyone down, we stole back the archives, and now we're going to have a big party. But I do want to talk about what the archives were briefly because you may think, oh, just some old books or like old history lessons, but the archives were actually legal documents and all of the records of who owns what land. Basically, at the time, they were what ran the country. So they were critical documents to the country's formation and to governing people in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, a state capital housed all your legal records, your land deeds, your legal records, any kind of state or government sort of documentation. And so, like, literally, whoever held the documents had the authority of the government.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is funny to note about this too, like, yes, Sam Houston ordered people to steal the archives and was really trying to move the capital from Austin to somewhere else. But what I would add to the story is there was actually a personal battle and conflict between Sam Houston and Mirbeau Lamar. So Sam Houston was two-time president of the Republic of Texas, eventually a senator and governor when US annexed Texas eventually. Mirbeau Lamar was the second president of the Republic of Texas and then a future ambassador as well. So, both very powerful political figures, rivals in a sense, in a very true sense. So, Sam Houston was not only just saying, hey, here are all these valid points for why Austin is not a good choice. It's on the edge of the frontier, Mexican conflict, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also Mirbeau Lamar's personal pet project to select Austin to become the capital of the Republic. So Sam Houston was like, no, no, no. I know a much better capital for the Republic,
Yeah.
the eponymously named Houston, right?
Indeed.
So this was a personal battle, not just a political one, even if Sam Houston's comments
Mm-hmm.
eventually made sense because of the San Antonio struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so often when you dig into where state capitals or even just country capitals are placed, you get the logical answer, but then there's also the human answer and the
Yes.
personalities and very big personalities at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
One interesting aspect of Austin's history is that after it was founded, voters actually choose Austin as the state capital two more times. So, again in the 1850 referendum and again in the 1872 election. And this happens even though growth stalled many times over the decades in Austin before it started to grow more sustainably. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about all the times that growth stalled in
Mm,
Austin because we so often talk about it as a boomtown,
yep.
right? And like how, how quickly it's growing. So after the founding between 1842 and 1845, alongside the conflict with Mexico, the population dropped between just it dropped below 200. So that was kind of the first time. So right after its founding, totally stalled. The second time was later. So it became a trading nexus. In 1871, the Houston, Texas Central Railway reached Austin,
Mm,
and it became the westernmost railroad nexus in Texas. So it sort of brought everyone west, and it became a major trading site. And so the population more than doubled in 5 years.
wow.
Construction boomed, and then new railroads continued to expand westward and crisscross the state, and Austin lost its position as the westernmost nexus. So again, growth stalled. The next time growth stalled was actually in 1881. Austin, again, in a statewide election, it was chosen as the home of the University of Texas. And this is very important, and we'll come back to this, but again, no breakout moment.
Hmm.
And then the fourth time, which is completely fascinating. So in the late 1880s, Austin built its first dam. And
Mm,
the idea was that if they brought hydroelectric power to the area, they would court industry. And it produced less power than expected. The manufacturers didn't come. It actually silted up the lake.
oh no.
And then the dam collapsed in 1900. So that was another big, big kind of failure.
Oh,
And so it wasn't actually into until the 1930s and 1940s that this state capital started to grow more sustainably. And it was actually helped by the Great Depression and government dollars that flowed to the city, and by one person in particular who was instrumental behind this. And I'll let you guess who it was.
I don't know. I'm very curious.
Okay, you're going to be disappointed that you didn't guess because it's Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson again.
Of course, LBJ.
Who is our recurring character on Build Order.
Sure is.
Yeah. But no, so he was instrumental in securing the federal funds that led to housing in Austin. It helped UT expand,
Mm,
and then dams across the Colorado River. So they built the Tom Miller Dam and the Mansfield dams. And that, for the first time, they were the ones that really brought cheap hydroelectric power to Austin, flood control. So the city
mm,
actually always had issues with major flooding
yeah,
until then, helped with water supply, and finally it helped with recreation. It sort of finally fulfilled its dream of having these lakes and being kind of a beautiful place to live.
that's so funny.
I
I can't
know.
believe it was LBJ, but
I
I do believe it at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. He had his hand in like every pot related to Texas over his entire career,
He
which
did.
yeah, it's actually pretty admirable his political chops and yeah, how much he cared about Texas.
It is. I mean, I think there's plenty of presidents who become president and don't necessarily do as much to help their home state as LBJ did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think, Jen? I mean, Austin's got kind of an interesting history where, it wasn't a boomtown from the beginning. It actually really like struggled along for many decades. Do you think that it being the capital is what made it successful over time? It was sort of like the floor, if you will, to its success? Or do you think that ultimately there were just a ton of other elements here that would have led to it breaking out as a city one day?
No, I definitely think it was the capital and being chosen as a city as opposed to just magically turning into
Mm.
this mecca that it is today. So I personally think the linchpin was UT. So you mentioned Austin was chosen for that in 1881, but the land was actually set aside many years prior. So the Republic of Texas chose Austin as the seat of government in 1839. And at the same time, they set aside the original 40 acres on College Hill for some future university someday. And then that ultimately became where
Hmm.
UT is now located today. And there's so much talent, so much research that comes to UT, again, from federal dollars coming in as well as state dollars and all of the different, oil and gas money that we've had for years, if we're being totally honest.
Yeah.
Austin has been benefiting from the state resources,
Hmm.
not just from what's limited to the Austin, Central Texas area. So it's definitely, I think, benefited from broader Texas and especially from UT and the talent pool that we have
Hmm.
here.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think and state capitals are all different, but the fact that it was the capital and then it had the university though, because the
Yes,
university is this talent engine that all of a sudden starts to work as a machine and
exactly.
invigorate the area. And another thing I find super interesting about the story is that, like, how is it that in these other in two elections that Austin won again as capital? And it seems to me that what was going on was people were voting for Austin because they didn't want power to sit in these bigger cities, and I think in the second one, it was kind of like, was it going to be Waco, Houston, or Austin, interestingly enough? But they
Mm.
were bigger cities at the time and more important. And so there's kind of this let's make sure that the people who pull all the strings aren't necessarily right next to the seat of power. And I find it funny because I can't help but think sometimes like with the 1881 choice to put UT there was kind of like a similar logic that was followed. But I mean, if you take it to the nth degree, then I mean, once you have the capital and a major university, you've just created maybe the conditions for this city to be really important. So if your objective was to vote to make sure power would be decentralized, and so you're picking Austin, eventually you created the conditions for that perhaps no longer to be the case.
I could not agree more with you. But I do think that, at least at some level, the other cities in any state, whether they're port
Hmm.
cities or they have natural resources, whatever it may be,
Hmm.
they're still going to succeed in
Hmm.
those areas. There are certain reasons why a city like Austin does not beat out a city like Houston in the energy race or, Dallas. Well, Dallas is an interesting character from a
Yeah.
finance perspective because yes, it's more north than
Right.
Austin, but like I don't I would love to understand more why Dallas has become the private equity, the
Yeah.
finance sector of all of Texas.
But Dallas is really that was born as an oil town, right?
It was born as an oil town,
Yeah.
yes, and then became like a financial hub and financial
Yeah.
center. Um, but yeah, I think the natural resources for oil and gas, though, more obviously sit
Hmm.
with Houston, and then Dallas is just closer to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Is
Oh,
probably the right answer.
that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, and from a geographic perspective, also picking Austin makes a lot of sense. And you find this a lot. I mean, we were talking about it with Columbus, right? Where I mean, if you look at a map, you're kind of like, oh, we're kind of in the center, or we represent something like, here Austin's not quite in the center of Texas, but it did represent like sort of this ambition for Texas to grow westward, and so it was kind of like picking the frontier. And also, my understanding is they thought the area was beautiful. It was kind of like a nice place to plan a capital or plant.
Yes. It is kind of funny, like, oh, this is prettier than these other areas,
Yeah.
therefore let's make it the capital.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
It does make sense though, because back in those days,
Mm.
the leading politicians were also leading executives,
Yeah.
right? Leading businessmen in other areas who just had a lot of private wealth. And really, I don't think that's changed too much from today. Most politicians also follow that same pedigree.
Mhm.
So for them, it's probably like, where do I want to spend a few months every year?
Mhm.
Somewhere nice that I can essentially vacation.
Yeah. And when you read about the history of urban design for, a long, long hundreds of years, there was, let's plan everything. Let's make,
Mm.
perfectly perpendicular streets and build these sort of like neo-Gothic or neoclassical, like, capitals. And so I find that interesting too. So it's like, oh, we need the land to do this. We don't want it to be too organic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's zoom out from Austin now to ask a question, which is what does a state capital do anyway?
Hmm.
And so, at a very basic level, the first thing is it's the seat of government for the state. So, that's where the administrative decisions are made, that's where the legislature meets, that's where state agencies cluster. But the second thing historically, which is what you mentioned before, which is the records were located there, the physical records. And so this is land records, legal, court filings, everything you needed to administer power throughout the state was physically located in that capital. And that's why the archive war isn't just a funny story about Austin. It's literally whoever controlled the records controlled the legitimacy of the government.
Mm.
And so the third thing that you need to know about state capitals is from the beginning of this country, there was an acknowledgement that wherever the government would cluster, all the other loci of power would come. Whether
Mm.
it was the bankers, the financiers, the media, businessmen, university leaders, lobbyists. And so this gets into something very American here, which is when the United States was set up, in a lot of instances, they very deliberately said, we don't want to set up our capitals like Europe,
Mhm.
where in Europe, the state capital, or the country capital, is literally the cultural, social, political, economic center of the country. So think about Athens or
Yeah.
Paris, think about Madrid, think about Vienna. And so in the United States, power was deliberately fragmented across our political structure. And that logic applied as well to where we placed our state capitals. So there's a key figure behind all this. There's a few, but one of the ones that we have to talk about first is Thomas Jefferson, because he was deeply skeptical of how the Europeans had set up their capital cities. And he was instrumental, along with two others, in having DC be named the capital over New York City. He really didn't want it to be New York
Mhm.
City. And actually, New York City was the capital of the United States from 1785 to 1790.
Mm.
So at one point, New York was both the capital of the country and the primary, one of the biggest like commercial, like economic centers in the country. And in Virginia, Jefferson, he actually helped to move the capital from Williamsburg to Richmond.
Mm.
And he did it for a very similar reason as in Austin. So he wanted to move the capital inland, away from the coastal elites, to represent sort of like territorial expansion into the state and internal access. And he inspired a lot of others to do it later on, including, right, Austin and other capitals, Columbus for that matter. So, I find it really interesting that the historic play in the United States has been to separate the center of politics from the state's commercial power
Mm.
and even from its population centers. And so, do you think that makes politics more balanced or do you think it makes it less accountable?
I'm definitely on the side of Thomas Jefferson here because I agree that if you have too much power, power corrupts, as anyone who's seen the Spider-Man movies can
Mhm.
attest to.
Yeah.
But anyway, too much power really does corrupt. And I think having it spread out across
Mhm.
different states or across different cities within the state or cities within the country makes a ton of sense to me. And you mentioned that there were a couple of key people in this. The two that I know best were Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton,
Mhm.
because Hamilton definitely felt more European. Like the major cities should also have all of the banking, all of the legislative power, all of the commerce, and just major decision making.
Mhm.
Jefferson did not agree,
Mhm.
obviously. If you've seen the musical Hamilton, which
Yeah.
I'm guessing you have, Lauren.
Yes.
Yes, everyone who has seen it probably remembers there is a deal that's struck between Hamilton and Jefferson. It is a pivotal point
Hmm.
in the musical.
And James Madison.
And James Madison, yes, can't forget James Madison. I like the Jefferson Hamilton rivalry a
I
bit more. That
know.
one's so fun in the show.
And it was real.
It was real,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes. So Hamilton really argued for federal assumption of debts. He wanted the national government to be able to accumulate all of the debt and make amazing financial decisions because of it, which has definitely helped the US become the superpower financially that it is today. But Hamilton did not agree with that. He really believed that power should be distributed among the states. And
Yeah.
his compromise was that New York wouldn't get to be the capital, and instead it would be on the Potomac.
Hmm.
So that's ultimately how that ended up. Again, it was Madison and Hamilton, or excuse me, again, it was Madison and Jefferson, not just Jefferson by himself fighting Hamilton, but still, that's how the deal was struck.
Yeah. And that was called the Compromise of 1790.
Ah, thank
Yeah.
you for naming it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that they would agree that the capital would be in the South in exchange for the assumption of the northern debts from the Revolutionary War, which the southern states didn't want to pay off.
Yes, although
Yeah,
it's still hilarious to me that those are called Southern
I
states.
know. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
Back
not.
then,
Yeah,
back
back
then.
back then. Yeah. Well, yeah, you point to kind of a funny you point to a funny sort of dynamic between the two because I didn't even know. So, this is funny. I didn't know that Jefferson, and his, the people who kind of like anti-Hamilton, if you will, they used to call it New York City Hamiltonopolis.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, because he had such a sway there, and then, but that was the key tension at the time, which was that Jefferson sort of believed in this like agrarian utopia, and he
yes.
believed that if people owned land and spread out, then it would bring out the best in their, humanity, and because they own land, they would be better, in a democracy. They would be better advocates for like the common good. They would have something to fight for. And he really believed that like the great masses in the cities was the opposite of democracy and it would ruin the country. But some of the things he says, you wonder how much of a Democrat, right, he was versus, yeah, a Republican, in the sense of being like democracy versus republic.
Mm.
And he, just to give you a sense of what he thought of cities, I have a very funny quote, which is this is from his notes on the state of Virginia in 1787. He said, "The mobs of great cities add just so much to the support of pure government as sores do to the strength of the human body."
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that kind of sums it up, what he sort of thought of big cities. So he was very pro, let's move the capital somewhere else. Can't be in New York.
Very much
Yeah.
like, didn't agree with Sam Houston,
Hmm.
but also didn't mince words like Sam Houston.
That's right. He definitely did not mince words. To come back to the question around the does it make politics more balanced or less accountable? It's a tricky one, right?
Mm,
It's a tough question to have today, I think, because we're so digital as an economy and a world and the media. I mean, what happens in the state capitol can very easily circulate now across the country in minutes, which it does. And so maybe it's sort of a foreign problem to us, but at the time there was kind of like two tensions. One was let's not put the capital near, the great masses or near, all the kind of power brokers of the state because then they'll control everything. So people were deliberately doing it for that reason. But there was also a little bit, let's put ourselves kind of far out so that we can actually do things without them, maybe a little shady. Like we don't want them looking, we don't want the
we don't want Big
media.
Brother.
We don't want Big Brother, we don't want the newspapers, we don't want them breathing down our necks. We just wanna, like, go do our thing, and
Mm,
so there's kinda, like, this funny tension where, on one hand, it was like, "Okay, we're doing this for the greater good," and the other hand, we're doing this to kind of, like, hide from the greater good.
right. Well, let me ask you this. If you were restructuring state capitals
Yeah,
today, we can stick with Texas.
yeah.
Would you move the capital outside of Austin? Do you think Austin has too much power at this point? And if we were
Hmm,
making this decision again today, let's say
yeah,
that we voted and said, oh, no, we don't want Austin to be the capital for whatever
yeah.
reason, would you move it or would you keep it?
I don't know. I think I'd probably keep it. Great question.
Mm.
Because does it matter anymore? It's easy to
Mm.
get everywhere.
That's true.
Does it matter?
And it's not like we have the archives problem anymore.
You can access everything online. You can get
Mhm.
everywhere very quickly in the United States, and people demand accountability and and they have access to all the information. So I'm not sure. If anything, that's our problem, which is people are so focused because you can get information from everywhere
Mm.
on national politics, and they don't always think about what's going on at the local level. And that's really where the country thrives.
Exactly, that's where you can actually have an impact is locally,
Hmm.
not nationally, but everyone loves the sensational media that happens on
Yeah.
the national level.
Yeah. If anything, keep the capitals where they are, but maybe I don't know how you foster more of kind of local. Maybe you need to foster more local politics. Maybe that would be probably be a boon to just, people being a little less angry and right, like, political all the time if you were a little bit more focused on your own community.
I could not agree more, and it helps erode divisiveness
Hmm.
too. Do you know the story of Daryl
No.
Davis? He has a fascinating story. So he was actually a black man who one by one convinced so many white men to leave the KKK. He did it not by asking them to leave, but just befriending them one by one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So instead of starting at this, global national level and
Hmm.
talking about how we need to be better as a country and treat everyone respectfully, regardless of race, he said, you know what? No, I'm just going to befriend these people one on one and
Yeah.
start it at the local level and make a change.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. The other component here of the capital question is it's kind of an interesting thought to think that if you put the capital away from everyone,
Mm,
that it would represent the people that it's supposed to represent.
yeah.
When I mean at the time when they were, building these capitals, I mean, traveling was much more of an adventure than it is now, although, depending on what happened your flight last Thursday, you may
You
disagree.
may, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you were, horse and buggy wagons, and
Mm-hmm.
you were headed off into the frontier.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, how did they even feel? It's sort of like the ivory tower of government, is it not? That you feel like you can direct the state when you're not even able to talk to the people very efficiently.
Mm,
This is kind of anyway, pros and cons.
definitely pros and cons. It's not a clear-cut answer, and there's definitely some just ideal theorizing happening here,
Hmm.
not some practical assumptions of what would actually work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about state capitals as a whole now. Let's expand a little bit beyond Austin. And this is where the data actually really surprised me because I don't know about you, but I went into this episode thinking most state capitals would be modest economies. If
Mm,
you ask the average American what is the state capital of X state, they don't always get it right. In fact, they very often don't. So I thought that these state capitals would be important politically, almost from like administrative perspective, if you will, now, especially as our politics has become more national,
mm.
but not economically important outside of a few outliers. Okay. Now here's where I was totally wrong. So I dug into the 2024 BEA, that's the Bureau of Economic Analysis, their county GDP data. And get this, so 65% of state capitals are in the top 10% of all US counties by GDP. So
Wow.
they are outperformers, the majority of them. 35% of state capitals are actually the number one GDP county in their own state. So
Wow.
35% lead their state economically. And 71% rank in the top four counties in their
Mm,
state by GDP. So these are all very well performing cities as a whole. And I also did a version of this analysis excluding any portion of the GDP that was government
mm.
dollars, like government enterprises, right? Because, what if it's just the government paying itself and that's why that
Right. They're
county is
swinging
doing
the
so
vote.
well? But the rankings actually barely changed.
Really? Wow.
So, exactly. So these aren't just government towns with sort of like inflated public sector numbers. These are real economic players in the country and in their state. And so my question is, why do we underestimate state capitals? Why do we have this opinion of them like they're on the whole unimportant?
True. Well, I also wonder too, how many of them are similar to the Austin story,
Mm,
where they were picked because they're the center of the state or they were on the frontier, and then now today we see them as these economic powerhouses,
mm,
whereas before they weren't. Is that
mhm.
the majority of these state capitals, you think?
No, I don't know that all
Okay.
of them played out that way. When you look at the kinds of capital cities that exist, and maybe this is a good place to start, just to kind of categorize them, because I'll tell you a little bit about what happened here, which is there's some capital cities that did very well from the beginning, and actually they're almost like the singular economic powerhouse in
Mm.
the state. So Boston,
Mm.
Atlanta, Phoenix, Denver, I mean, these are the most important cities in their state. And it almost follows the European model. They made the capital the center of everything, right? But then they're on like the total flip side, there's sort of like the pure compromise administrative capital. And here I'm gonna apologize because maybe I'm sure they're lovely cities, but compared to the Bostons of the world, I mean, we have cities like Albany, Jefferson City, Frankfurt, Montpellier, Carson City, Pierre. I mean, these are small cities that we know of, but I'd wager a lot of people couldn't tell you what states they're in.
I was about to say, I know that I memorized these when I was in first grade, but
Hmm.
I do not remember them all now. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, and they really are like the administrative center of the state, but they're not really known for being a big important city.
Right.
So, in a lot of these, when you start looking at where they are, you do start to wonder, okay, were these kind of placed geographically planned to your question? But then there's a couple other interesting categories. So one is, and when you start looking at capital cities that some of them have major universities.
Mm.
And this is where I'm going to read off some more names. Now all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, I know these cities. Austin, Madison, Raleigh, Columbus, Ohio, Baton Rouge, Columbia, Lincoln, Nashville, Tallahassee. And so that's interesting. Okay, they have the university. And then the last kind of category that I was thinking of was there's some capitals that are like totally overshadowed by larger metros.
Mm.
So Olympia near Seattle,
Mm. Right.
or Sacramento, a little bit too close to San Francisco, Annapolis,
Yes.
beautiful city, very close to Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And they never were really like absorbed into those metros. They were important, they're important politically. They're far enough away that they're distinct, but they're too close to the economic powerhouse to kind of have broken out.
Right.
So when you start thinking about like these four categories that I mentioned, the singular economic powerhouse, the ones that are like compromised administrative capitals, the ones with the university, the ones that are too close to the metro centers, and you just start taking all these examples. Like I think to your question, yeah, I mean, sometimes they were planned,
Right.
a lot of them, but maybe sometimes the plan was to centralize in the major commercial zone. And sometimes like the planning seems to have failed almost. Like when
Mm.
Annapolis is so close to Baltimore, for example. I mean, I don't think that was the intent necessarily.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Beautiful city though.
Mm-hmm.
Just love that area. But yeah, it's not, it's a destination town for
Mm-hmm.
people who live in Baltimore to go visit and be a tourist, not actually go there for I don't even know that there is a major university in Annapolis. Perhaps there is, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not aware of it. There's
Mm-hmm.
a Naval
A
Academy.
Naval Academy.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but
Not like a big state university.
exactly.
W-
No, University of Maryland, and
Yeah.
that's in Baltimore.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, do you think, especially when you think about some of these categories, do you think that like we assume that all of the capitals are kind of these, cities that we've never heard of, and then we think, oh right, like Denver is that part of what's going on? We're like, oh yeah, Denver is the capital of Colorado, I forgot. Or like Boston's the capital of Massachusetts.
I think you remember it if it is a known city
Hmm.
because it's been successful. It's a product of its success, and then you
Hmm.
know it that way. But otherwise, for any other state, you tend to assume at this point that the most successful city is probably the capital. I'm sure
Hmm.
people who visit the US from around the world
Hmm.
assume that New York is the capital of New York,
Oh wow.
right?
Of the country. Yeah.
Or of the country even, but I was going to say of just the state of New
Oh
York.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's because they're coming from Europe or other countries where that's a bit more of the case, where the most important city is the capital?
It could be, but I also think that we just equate importance with power.
Hmm.
And that's where I think there's a big disconnect here is because most most administrative power is very quiet
Hmm.
versus skyscrapers where it's just very obvious
Hmm.
that the city is powerful. So I think that to me is where, yes, if you come from Europe, you probably think that, but also if you come from maybe Australia or somewhere in China, well, China's probably not the best example. But if you're coming from anywhere else in the world, you tend to just equate what's visible
Hmm.
to power.
Yeah.
And a lot of these cities historically, like Austin even, didn't have skyscrapers really until like 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's an element of that where we kind of like assume that the administrative power is sort of like it not even assume the administrative power is harder to see
It's
than
invisible.
it's invisible compared to
Hmm.
the skylines and the most important cities. And a lot of the capital cities, even though they are economically important in their own right, they don't kind of play as well with the New Yorks and the Chicagos of the world, which were a bit flashier. And we're just kind of more accustomed to, oh, that must be the most important city. But I think it also speaks to how the United States deliberately set itself up differently with states as a republic. And so these, capitals, and maybe even these capitals were more important in the past when politics and economy and just where you would travel was more local. And
Mm,
so maybe I don't know, like 100 years ago, would we have been better at knowing what the capitals are than we are today?
probably so.
Yeah.
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 Well, I'm curious, tell me more about those four categories that you mentioned, Lauren.
Yeah. So yes. So I think that there's kind of four categories of capital cities. From, the ones that are the singular economic powerhouse, the ones that were kind of the compromise
Mm,
administrative capital, the ones that are too close to other large cities, and then the fourth category being the ones that have major state universities. And when I look at these, I think it's really interesting to think about the build order of their success,
mm,
right? And this comes back to our Austin discussion, which is the cities that I mentioned that are the major state capitals that have universities. Those are names that we know and remember, right? Like Raleigh and Columbus and Austin. And so I was wondering, it seems to me that one of the major kind of like powerhouse duos in this country for city formation is capital plus major state university. And when that came together, that city really outperformed eventually, especially where, in a world and economy where we're moving towards more technology and
mm-hmm.
R&D and, science
And air
kind of
travel is a
focus.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
It's ironic because who would know? Who
Hmm.
would have that prescient knowledge to say, yes, putting the university in this city where we also have the administrative power
Yeah.
is that's the special ingredient. That's a secret sauce. I don't know that I could say I would know that. But hindsight is 2020 and it definitely seems to be critical because you're creating that talent pool, which will then bring in other industries. For Austin, it happens to be technology,
Hmm.
but Columbus is manufacturing. I think it's just whatever that university is set up for, that is what you can bring to the area in terms of the talent pool.
Yeah, and I sort of wagered that in the past, because much fewer people went to university or were allowed to go to university. And so it was probably this kind of like virtuous cycle of like, let's train the people who will then be in the government,
Mm,
kind of like,
yes,
yeah, right? And now it's totally different where like the big highest performing universities in the country have like high R&D dollars from the government. And so they became the loci of where the next industries will be born and the next companies.
exactly.
Yeah, especially around World War II and afterwards.
Yes. And I think there's also some not so much causality here, but correlation
Mm,
with just air travel and
hmm.
cars and you know, we talked about Columbus being the buggy capital of the
Hmm.
world, the dune buggy capital of the world, but really just being able to move people across the state or across the country easily, regardless of where the capital is located.
Yeah,
So Austin being in the center of Texas, not really close to a port, was an issue when Texas was founded, but it's not an issue today, and it hasn't been an issue for some time.
yeah, yeah. So they're successful in this day and age, and it wasn't necessarily planned.
Exactly,
This
and it
this little
wasn't
duo.
Yes, and it wasn't all the university. There was also just the right circumstances, right? I don't
Mhm.
know that even if we had the university, but we didn't have air travel, would Austin be the success that it is
Hmm.
today? Would some of these other state capitals be as successful as they
Yeah.
are? I don't think so. I think these things all had to happen at the right time and just have the exact right build order, to your point.
Yeah. Although the ones that they picked that were on ports, like the Boston and the
Mm,
Atlantas of the United States, they are successful for other reasons and a product of their geography and the fact that they were able to kind of explode as commercial and population centers. And
right.
so, and yeah, so they probably would have succeeded anyway. But then, yeah, I completely agree about the university. They probably didn't think about necessarily. Maybe you couldn't have foreseen how important universities would have been to R&D and to talent production in the United States, like as a machine, because it was much more rarefied in the past than it is now, and the
Mm,
economy has changed. And maybe they couldn't even have foreseen how much federal money would flow into the states because that wasn't the case when they were creating the capitals as well. So this whole idea that we're going to separate the capitals and put them in a
right.
place where they're not going to be controlled by, other sources of power is less true today. Maybe there is even an advantage in being in your state capital.
Perhaps so. And isn't it ironic? Hamilton might be turning over in his grave,
Yeah.
knowing that he's actually helping Jefferson's mission succeed in some way.
Yeah. Or that he won in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, and then, the other one that's kind of interesting to talk about, just like thinking about build order was these capitals that were overshadowed by the larger metros. And like on it, so yeah, Sacramento, Olympia, Annapolis, those are a few I pulled out. I mean, I don't know how you could have planned that, to avoid that. I don't know that they necessarily thought that would happen. I don't know as much about the Annapolis, Baltimore story, but certainly like in the Sacramento, San Francisco situation. I mean, San Francisco and the Bay Area was always incredibly beautiful. I mean, when they got there, they were like, wow, we need to
Mm,
live here. And so, maybe it was always destined to be a population center, but no one knew. I mean, it was apple orchards. No
right.
one knew that Silicon Valley was going to be born there. How
Hmm.
how would you have known?
I don't think you could have. The only way I think perhaps you could have known a bit better was just assume that we get better and better at moving people
Hmm.
and we keep innovating, whether it was with the Industrial Revolution and that was more about moving agrarian like cattle or corn or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But even just moving people with dune buggies and then cars and
Hmm.
then, I think perhaps the folks who planned those state capitals did not have in the back of their head somewhere that, oh, humanity is going to advance such that this may seem far away now, but it will not be far away in the future.
Hmm.
Therefore, we should separate the capital city from the source of commerce a
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah. I mean, just taking that to the end conclusion, I mean, as the world gets more
Mm.
connected, I mean, yeah, what is that? Where do we end up? It's almost impossible to separate. It is impossible, I would wager, to separate politics from instant communication anywhere in the world.
It is. I almost feel like the time has passed for this.
Yeah.
Like what you chose is what you chose,
Hmm.
unless it's a new nation starting over that can learn from what has happened elsewhere.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Which I hate saying because I generally believe that you can always improve and get better.
I counter argument. I
Mm,
think in the New York Albany case that because Albany is if the capital had been New York City, there's always this tension between New York City and Albany because New York City provides the most tax dollars relative to the state. It has the most expensive budget. It is the major center of population in the entire state. But New York City is very different from the rest of upstate New York,
mm,
politically, economically, culturally.
right.
And so if you didn't have the capital in Albany, I think it would be even worse, this kind of tension between different sort of citizens in the state. And so, maybe at the state level, we're not giving the capitals enough credit.
Mm.
Maybe we should even reevaluate where some capitals are so that they could be placed somewhere where maybe they would help the minority of the state be more advantaged and sort of like getting their needs met.
So you would change to my earlier question.
Yeah, I
You
would.
would.
There we go. Yeah,
You would.
I
All
would.
right.
Now I know. Yeah. So there's probably a few places they should probably move the capital.
Mm.
Yeah. But, it depends if you believe in sort of like a winner takes all kind of democracy politics, or if you believe in, what they originally, attempted to do here in terms of the republic, where everyone is sort of begrudgingly compromising most of the time. And if you believe in that, then yes, you should probably think about if the state capital should move somewhere where you can help the minority of your state be heard.
I could not agree more. I grew up in a small town. I have a lot of family who still lives in small towns. And there is definitely this notion that is not incorrect that the cities don't care about you. Right. And if
Yeah.
the major political decisions are being made in those cities, then that feeling just gets worse and worse. And I
Hmm.
mean, that is the divide that has been hurting America so much over the last few years.
Yeah, and it plays out at the state and country level as well,
Hmm.
which is we've become so national that how people in, I don't know, a 15-hour drive away from you live affects you. And that
Yeah.
that wasn't by design in this country. That's where we are ending up.
Mm.
But it might not be the optimal outcome.
Correct. And people in small town Texas have more in common with people in a small town in Michigan than they
Hmm.
do with people who live in the city in Texas.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to move the state capitals, would that be what would happen? We would just say, okay, we need to find smaller rural towns that the capitals need to move in to sort of like invigorate these areas, make sure everyone's heard. Would that actually lead to healthier politics because people would be listened to?
It would at least give the appearance of them being listened to, which to me always comes first.
Mhm.
Like, you have to at least have the appearance of something happening before it actually happens. So, in,
Mhm.
in an episode, we also talked about semiconductors. We talked about MCC, which is this semiconductor consortium that came to Austin. It was not successful. And
Mhm.
then, Lauren, you pointed out, well, yeah, it wasn't successful, but then Semitech came along on its shoulders and it was,
Mhm.
right? But MCC had the value of creating the appearance that Austin was a big tech city that a semiconductor consortium should go to. And
Yeah.
without it, I don't know that Semitech would have happened.
Mhm.
So I think the same thing applies here to these smaller towns
Mhm.
that if they are lucky enough to get a capital, and then they also have these other ingredients like perhaps the state university
Mhm.
or benefit from being on a port or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
then they are able to grow and succeed, but not if they don't have all of those layers.
Yeah, and there's two things here which is interesting. One is whether they're a successful city
Mm,
and what the elements that need to come together as state capital are, and then whether they're good representatives of like the state politics as
yes,
a result of who they're listening to.
right.
Yeah, and I maybe it is unfair to say that in a digital economy we don't need to talk about this anymore because we all know it's very true when you get together with a person in person, you're not, right? Like on Zoom or on a phone call, there's just a much different rapport and much better understanding. So it does matter where you are still.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this seems like as good a place of any to end here. So, Jen, what did you take away from this conversation?
Oh, my biggest takeaway was something I did not consider and that I had not even
Mhm.
realized I felt this way, but I agree with you. I think if I had the chance to restructure our government today across the nation, not just in Texas, then
Mhm.
I would definitely rethink where some of our state capitals are
Mhm.
and relocate them in areas so that people whose voices don't get heard at least have the feeling of being heard.
Mhm. Wild follow-up question. If
Mm.
you could replace the United States Capitol, would you do it?
Ooh. Do I think DC has enough power that I think we need to move it? I actually don't know that it does. And maybe that's a knock on DC, but the reason I don't know that it does is because of a lot of changes that Trump has implemented and a lot of people who worked in politics being let go and moving out of the DC, Virginia area
Mhm.
to other parts of the US because they need to find work.
Mhm.
So, just naturally within the last few years, we've had some power shifts
Mhm.
happening in that area that I think have changed in my mind
Mm.
whether or not DC is such a powerhouse. And there's no other real industry in DC,
Yeah,
right? They're not
right.
competing with anything
They did a good
besides
job
politics.
creating it as its own entity. Yeah, and not kind of
Exactly.
part of any state. And some of the states are such big economic powerhouses that you can't fully control everything in the country from one place. Although I will say, I do think if they had known that the United States was going to go coast to coast and be what it
It's
is,
true, the
they
center.
probably would have placed it in the center somewhere, right?
That's true.
Yeah, because right now it was kind of like the center, it was between the North and the South
Mhm.
and very focused on Europe. And now, kind of, we obviously extend all the way to the Pacific coast. You have Asia. I wonder if they wouldn't have placed it somewhere right in the middle of the country.
True.
Oklahoma.
Who knows? Oklahoma.
Yeah, in another world.
Well, maybe not there though because of the Native American
Oh,
lands,
yeah,
but somewhere
or
else.
natural disasters,
Or
which we haven't
natural
even talked
disasters,
about.
tornadoes.
Well, that's it. Well, so what I took away was that state capitals are much more important than I had thought from the economic numbers. A lot of
Mm,
them really punch above their weight, and even excluding the government GDP. So I thought that forgettable government town trope that we have, which is how we use to justify that we don't remember our middle school geography lessons,
yes.
does not actually hold. And I don't think that's accidental. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is where we'll end our discussion for this time. And what I want to leave everyone with is that state capitals were one of the earliest ways that the United States decided as an early country where power would be held and where it would flow across the country and the republic. And so many capitals were deliberately placed away from large population centers, away from the most important commercial interests in the state, away from coastal ports, often is what that meant, and away from any one city having too much control over everything in the state. And some of these capital cities, like Austin, succeeded after many, many decades of uneven growth. And in this case, as being the capital gave the city an institutional floor below which it could never fall. It didn't guarantee greatness, but it guaranteed a chance and would make the
Mhm.
city harder to erase, especially after it then acquired a talent engine, a university, which, we think is one of the most important elements of city growth in general. So the next time someone asks you to name a state capital, you can tell them actually the whole point is that they were supposed to be forgettable and it's not your fault. Because this is part of America's federalist inheritance. It's not just our term limits, it's not just our electoral votes, it's not just three branches of government. It's also spreading out the geography of power itself. And so our capital cities may not always be glamorous or memorable or obvious, but there's one thing that they will always be, which is very American. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.